Bhagavatam. Today I have a very interesting topic to discuss with you, and it's about intelligence. We've been on this topic of artificial intelligence now for the last, I think, few months. Though computer scientists have been working on it for many years now, but it's now exploded in our common, world, in our world at least. And for many people, it's starting to feel like they might get displaced. They might not have a place to function the way they did before, especially if they're in the industry that required some kind of knowledge, that required some kind of skill, whether that's in computers or in writing or in graphics or whatever else. There's so much confusion and anxiety about it all. But it is bringing up something very important. It is highlighting a great weakness in our human society. And I'd like to talk about that. I want to talk about three different kinds of intelligence: artificial intelligence, which we spoke about right now, human intelligence, which is our normal intelligence, and then something called spiritual intelligence. They're both, and all of these, rather, all three of these are very powerful, and they all have their unique place. And we as human beings are going to have to find something that computers cannot do. And this may be one of the most important episodes you're going to hear for that very reason. So let's start with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, as you know, is something that is put together for computer systems so that they can reason, learn, and act autonomously. It's trained on a large data set of algorithms and data that allow computers to make predictions and solve problems and make decisions and present wonderful graphics and present wonderful answers to our questions. What are the cons of that? Well, it takes tens of millions of dollars to build such an infrastructure, and thousands of engineers. Of course, they get good jobs. But it does hold the potential of possibly replacing millions of human jobs as we know them today. The other con is that it needs huge data server farms that cost millions of dollars a day to run. And deploying things like ChatGPT, for example, into Google would take about 513,000 servers, such is the research I've done, and it would exceed $100 billion in expenses. On the other hand, we have our human intelligence, and that has been around with us for thousands of years. It's been developing, and we've brought it to a certain place as it is now. It has its pros and cons as well. The pros of human intelligence are that it's very good at problem solving, reasoning, learning, creativity, and cognition, which is the ability to process information and make decisions. All to varying degrees. Some of us are more creative than others. Some are better at problem solving than others. The cons are that human minds are not networked together and cannot access the wisdom, except the collective wisdom, shall we say, except through books and computers, which brings us back to the same thing with computers. The other part is that human intelligence needs to deal with our emotions, our moods, our self-criticism, or criticism of others, our incessant chatter within our mind, and our overthinking and our anxiety and worry. So many things it has to deal with instead of just being intelligent. There's also a tendency amongst human beings to want to escape, to avoid or numb out difficult situations through entertainment, social media, video games, alcohol, food, you name it. We have so many different ways of doing this, all of which take out a lot of our time and tend to dull our mind. And of course, there is the other factor which I often talk about, which is the abysmal lack of training in how to use this computer, this mind that we all have, but no instruction manual, so we really don't know how to optimize it. Now, spiritual intelligence, on the other hand, is about optimizing not only the mind, but also tapping into a higher force field or energy. It is, as I would like to call it, our neglected superpower. And it occurs when we learn to quiet our mind and when we learn to enter into a zone of inner peace. The pros for this spiritual intelligence are that it needs to be accessed through processes like meditation and flow states. And the benefit is that it brings about an increased self-awareness, productivity, clarity, focus, and even dedication. It gives us the ability to see multiple perspectives. It gives us greater empathy, compassion, positive, hopeful, balanced, and authentic ways of thinking that lead us feeling more joyful than before. It also has within it the ability to connect with a higher power or purpose that gives us a true sense of fulfillment, and that gives us wisdom to act in ways that are most beneficial for ourselves and all others around us. So there's a lot to it. But what are the cons? Well, the cons for spiritual intelligence are that it takes a lot of inner work. And in present times, very few people are able to slow down and have a spiritual practice. Our society has become so absorbed in materialistic acquisition and materialistic science that it has completely ignored the incredible capabilities of our spiritual nature. So keep all those factors in mind, and let's go deeper into what this is. What is spiritual intelligence? How is it cultivated? We're going to tap into the ancient wisdom of the Vedas in the Srimad Bhagavatam specifically, and we're going to try to understand it in a way that very few people know. All right, so let's get started. Now, we were, in the earlier episode, we were talking about how the sage Narad had come to help King Bharisat, also known as Prachinabari, by enlightening him about spirituality. Now, this is a time thousands of years ago when great sages tried to help the leaders of society, particularly, to become more spiritual so that they in turn would inspire the mass of people. It's not something we see in today's time, of course. And he was attempting to try to take this king who was extremely worldly and very devoted to trying to acquire material things, to try to enlighten him about the value of spirituality. So the king was so engrossed in his karmic activities that it was difficult to address him directly. So the great sage Narad used an indirect metaphorical approach. He spoke about someone else. You know how it is when you talk about somebody else, it's easier to understand than if somebody tells you about you and what you're doing wrong and what you should be doing. Nobody likes to hear that, right? So yes, he made it about somebody else. He talked about a king called Puranyajan. Now, don't get caught up with the words because they are in Sanskrit and it might seem a little confusing to you. I'll try and help you along the way. So he talked about this king who was besotted and in love with a beautiful woman. We all love stories like that, right? But here is a great sage talking about this incredible love affair this king was having. And after they married, he was so into her that he followed her everywhere and did whatever she did. One day he broke free and went hunting, and when he returned, she was distraught, but he managed to pacify her. Together they had many children and arranged for them to be married. So now, let's take this first part of the story. This is a summary from what we've talked about last time. We went into detail then. But the king is actually referred to as a metaphor for ourself, our soul, that is within this body-mind organism. The king was hunting for a perfect place to live, just as we are always looking for perfect and ideal situations. The queen, the woman he fell in love with and married, is symbolically representing our intelligence, which we are so enamored with. And whatever it tells us to do, we do. Whatever it wants us, however it guides us, we go that way. Whatever our mind tells us, we believe it blindly. And so it was with this king and his queen. And sometimes it happens in couples as well. So there's a lot of connection with reality in that sense. But for most of us, the lesson to take away is about how besotted we are with our own minds, how captivated we are, how much we believe them blindly, and how rarely we ever question what our mind tells us. Now, this king continued to serve his queen day and night, and then they had children, and then take care of the children, and they basically robbed all his energy, just as it happens with us. All our energy goes into taking care of whatever it is our mind tells us. Our mind says, hey, I want to have this, and I want to have that, and I want to have this car and that house and this and that, and we go chasing all of that. We work hard, we do whatever it takes, we become very focused and determined, or depressed if we feel we can't get there. And we make our whole life about acquiring these things, and we think that acquiring them will make us fulfilled and happy. But unfortunately, this mind of ours, this intelligence of ours, isn't the best gauge of what makes one happy. And so it has us running around all our life, only in the end to find out that, well, none of that really worked. And then we retire and we get old. And well. So now this king, gradually, time attacked his body for 100 years. His life force began to fight back, but gradually weakened, and the king became very anxious. He could not understand that his life was passing away and he was reaching the point of death. That's true for all of us. We are all racing towards the hungry mouth of death. And we don't want to hear that. We don't want anyone telling us that. We certainly don't want to go there, right? Be positive, we tell each other. Talk about good things, Don't talk about things like death. Gosh, who wants to do that? But that is the reality. And if we want to be enlightened, we have to wake up to this reality that we will get old, we will get diseased, we will die. And time is not on our side. So in this analogy, it talks about Kala Kanya, the daughter of time or old age, was seeking a husband. She was very unfortunate and ill-fated, and no one wanted her. Yet she came. Just like old age comes to us, we don't want it. We hate it, right? We're always so obsessing about how our bodies are changing because we're getting older. And yet it comes. In the Bhagavad Gita, I don't know if you've read that. If you haven't, please do. I've done an entire playlist on the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God. It's on my channel, so please check it out. There's a verse there in the 13th chapter which says, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukha Doshanudarshanam. This is in Sanskrit. And Srila Prabhupada, my spiritual teacher, translates it saying, no one wants to be diseased and no one wants to become old. But there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there is no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. It's a very important point to consider. If we are hopeful and optimistic that this life is going to give us the happiness we want, we're going to continue chasing it, right? The pursuit of life, liberty, and what is it now? Right? We want happiness, we want liberty, we want freedom, we want all these things our desires take us towards. But have they made anyone happy? And for how long? Right? Did they achieve their desire and then a little while later want something else? Maybe the next latest version of the same thing, or maybe something different, or maybe what the other person had, right? So this same daughter of time, Kala Kanya, old age, she approached the sage Narad, and he had rejected her because he had chosen to be a lifelong celibate. As a result, she cursed him and that he would never stay in one place for a long time. Well, as a lifelong celibate, he didn't mind that at all. He was used to traveling everywhere, but that's all right. For us, we may not like that. We want to have safety, we want security, we want a home, we want to be in one place where we can feel comfortable. But not for someone who does not have any attachment to the world. They're not like that. So then, this daughter of time, she approached the king of the Yavanas, whose name was Bhaya, or fear. So now fear personified was approached by the daughter of time, or in this case, old age. And she wanted him for a husband. He said, I'll accept you, but not as my wife. I'll accept you as a sister. And he says, I have a brother called Prajvara, which is like the great fever which comes at the time of death. And together, we're going to make a team, and we will imperceptibly attack people in general and kill them without opposition. This was going to be great fun, according to him, of course. So fear, old age, and fever attacked the body of the king Puranyajan with great force, all three of these. And although the king was surrounded with objects for enjoyment, and although his life energy and inhabitants of his body tried to protect him, they were rendered useless. So who are the residents of our body that try to protect us? Oh, all the cells, the white blood cells, the different organisms within our body that try to keep this thing going, right? And when they're not able to, well, they give up and they get defeated, like in the case of cancer. So gradually the king lost all his beauty and intelligence. He could no longer enjoy his senses, his lusty desires, his opulences or possessions, and thus he was forcibly conquered. Meanwhile, his wife, that is the intelligence, became cold and indifferent. His sons, grandsons, servants, and ministers, again different parts of the body, gradually turned against him. The king became very poor in everything. He was still very affectionate towards his wife and children and worried about maintaining them. Unfortunately, he did not understand the aim of life. You might be starting to understand that this is common for all of us, that this is the condition in which we all find ourselves. It continues, although the city was on fire, the life force being attacked by old age became very aggrieved to see his residents being attacked and bodily strength weakened. So we have a life force energy that runs through our body. It keeps us alive. At one part in the Bhagavatam, in just last time we talked about it, it referred to it as a 5-headed snake, 5 different kinds of life energy that are running through our body, prana, apan, and so on. In the yoga system, you learn that. So just as a serpent living within the cavity of a tree wishes to leave when there is a forest fire, so the life force within the body wanted to leave the city of the body due to the severe heat that was being generated. But then he was stopped from leaving by his enemies, that is these 3 forces of fear, old age, and fever that had come in, and he began to cry loudly. So we start panicking. Right? When we start feeling that we're about to die, when we're in our last days or we're not going to survive, we're sick, we start to panic. There comes a point of resignation, yes, but in the beginning, as we start to learn about it, you've just been told you have cancer, you've just been told you have a heart disease, there's a panic that comes in at first. So the king, who was overly attracted to his wife, that is the intelligence, was already quite poverty-stricken, meaning weak. He had become very weak. Being overly attached to the conceptions of I and mine, he became very sorry. So what does it mean? We are identified with this body as I, and the things we have, the people we have in our life as mine, my wife, my children, my house, my car. We're identified with all of this. Although we came with none of it and we will leave with none of it, yet we think of it as ours. And that attachment now causes great suffering. So the king thought, when I pass from this body, how will my wife maintain all these family members? How will they continue their lives? Their situation will be like that of passengers aboard a shipwreck in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes we worry, right? We worry about our loved ones. We worry about this body even. We don't realize that when we leave this body, it will have nothing. It cannot even function without the soul being present in it. So as the king lamented over the fate of his wife and children due to miserly intelligence, fear personified immediately drew near to arrest him. As the king was being dragged out of his body, so very real for all of us, we don't want to die, so we literally are pulled out of the body, kicking and screaming. For many people, I'm not saying everyone, there are some people who have come to peace with it, there are some who have accepted it. But for most people who are not cognizant of their spiritual identity, it is the only thing you've known, this body and mind and all the stuff you have. So literally the king was being dragged out of his body like an animal. His followers, the subtle body, which is the mind, intelligence, and ego. So what is the subtle body? We'll talk more about that. But it consists of the mind, intelligence, and ego. Okay, there's the gross body and the subtle body. So the subtle body became greatly aggrieved, and so these are his followers, right? They became greatly aggrieved, the mind, intelligence, and ego, and were forced to go with him. So the subtle body goes with the soul as it leaves the human physical form. That is why the mind, intellect, and ego go with the soul and then go into the next body. They do not remember what happened in the previous life, but the imprints, the wounding, the impact is all there. And if you have any questions on this, please feel free to write it in the chat, and keep in mind I will take it up afterwards or the comments later on. That most unkind king, Puranyajan, had killed many animals in various sacrifices. Now, taking advantage of this opportunity, as he was leaving the body, was being pulled out of the body, all these animals began to pierce him with their horns. It was as though he was being cut to pieces by axes. So the Vedic system doesn't talk about hell as such, but it does talk about karma. And when we kill a creature, whether that's a human or an animal, the consequence of that is something we will have to bear. The pain we have caused to that creature will be endured by us. Therefore, it is recommended to not kill and eat animals. You may say, oh no, I'm just paying for it. I'm going to the store. No, the fact that you don't realize that you paid someone to do your dirty work is the same as doing it yourself. You're just one of the people. In fact, if you weren't paying for it, and if many people stopped paying for it, they'd stop killing those animals. But we have to realize that. Due to his contaminated consciousness, the king remained in the dark region of material life, bereft of all remembrance of his true self for many, many years. So very often this happens, and I've experienced this when I've done past life regressions with people. They'll find themselves in a dark place. There's no remembrance of anything. No, it's not a place of hell or punishment or anything like that, but it is a place of blankness. They don't quite know what was happening to them. They don't know quite where they're going. They don't know quite who they are. And they're not able to fulfill their desires or enjoy the things that they want to enjoy. They're just existing for a period of time. Because the king had given up his body remembering his wife, and so in the next life he took birth as the daughter of King Vidarbha. So in other words, he took birth as a woman. The princess that he then became was very beautiful and was married to a powerful saintly king, Malayadhvaj. At the end of the life of King Malayadhvaj, the king left his palace and went to the forest. Now, this was a custom in ancient times in India, where even great kings at the end of their life would leave their palaces, their comforts, their servants and everything else, and go alone to the forest to focus on meditation. And usually their partner, their wife, would go with them, not the children. They would take care of the kingdom and so on, or even the family or business or whatever it was, depending on their profession. So you'd find these people going into the forest and devoting themselves to their spirituality and really diving deep into it. Like earlier, you couldn't do it because you were busy with your family and business and kingdom if you were a king. But now you became totally focused because they understood that this is the goal of human life. And so they would give up all comforts and live on next to nothing, as we'll see in the case of this king. The king performed severe austerities, bathing in the river and eating bulbs meaning from plant seeds, leaves, flowers, roots, fruits, and grasses. In time, he became very skinny, but his mind became equipoised to the dualities of cold and heat. So remember, there was no heating out there. There was no cooling out there. There was nothing, just the forest. So he became equipoised in the dualities of cold and heat, happiness and distress, wind and rain, hunger and thirst, the pleasant and the unpleasant. In other words, no longer being affected by any of this. This is mastery. This is what it means to become a human being. This is a real human being. This is the fulfillment of human life, where we rise beyond the mind, the intellect, and the ego. And we come to this place of equanimity. You may say, well, it's something very difficult and something only few people can do, and I can't go to the forest, and I can't do all these things. And well, the good news is you don't need to. The good news is that that which he attained is already within us. It's within you, it's within me, it's within all of us. What we seek is right here. But there is a process, and there needs to be a dedication and a devotion to access it. Anything worth having in this world takes work. It's not just going to happen. Someone's not just going to touch the top of your forehead and boom, you're there. Hey, that kind of instant enlightenment doesn't work. So then the king fixed his awareness on the supreme Brahman, who we know as Krishna, and remained immovable for 100 years of the Devas. And you may say, oh, this is impossible. But I've known of people, yogis, gurus, sadhus, who've talked about this, how they've sat in meditation and years have gone by. They've sat in meditation and it snowed around them. They didn't feel a thing. They've sat in meditation and not eaten for months and even years. You'll say, no, this is ridiculous. Not possible. They're living on their prana, their life energy. And it is with that they're connecting to the entire cosmos. And the energy of the universe is now filling them and nourishing them and nurturing them. And nothing else is needed. Just as sunlight comes in and nourishes and nurtures the plants, so also in the case of such enlightened beings, they are being filled by that supreme energy that is all around us and within us. So in this state, the king was instructed and enlightened by the supreme Godhead and attained perfect knowledge of the nature of his body, of the soul, the Paramatma, the great soul who is sitting beside him along with the soul, and devotion for the supreme Godhead. All of these things he was instructed on from within. It wasn't that he read any books. It wasn't that he went out to a lot of scriptures. Maybe he had earlier on. But now the real guidance was coming from within him. And that's what it means to be a mystic. It means to be connected to that source, to be connected to the divine or God, and from there to get our inspiration and wisdom. Now the queen accepted her husband. Remember, this queen had been a king earlier in her previous life, and now is here as a queen. In the previous life was not interested in spiritual things, but now was with a husband, and the husband was deeply spiritual. So she had accepted her husband as all in all. She gave up all sensual enjoyment and in complete renunciation followed the principles of her husband, who was very spiritually advanced. Thus she remained engaged in his service. Now, in today's time, we don't understand such things, right? If the husband wants to go, let him go. I'm going to stay back and I'm going to be in my house and I'm just going to enjoy. But no, they understood that this was the aim of life. And so that person who was more spiritually advanced became your guide and your support, and you went in the direction that that person was able to go and said, hey, I want to go that way too. So she wore old garments and became lean and thin like her husband. Since she did not arrange her hair, it became entangled and twisted in locks. And although she remained always near her husband, she was as silent and unagitated as the flame of an undisturbed fire. She continued to serve him till she could ascertain that he had passed away from the body. She felt great anxiety upon being left alone in that forest. Bereft of her husband's company, she felt exactly as the deer feels upon being separated from its mate. Now keep in mind, she had not attained the same level of spiritual samadhi, as it is called, or sense of connection or oneness with the divine, as he had. So she was still very much attached at a human level. She began to lament severely, shedding incessant tears and crying very loudly. "O best of kings, please get up, get up. Just see, this world is infested with rogues and so-called kings. People are very much afraid. It is your duty to protect them." He was already gone. She then prepared a blazing fire with firewood and placed the dead body of her husband upon it. When this was finished, she prepared herself to perish in the fire with her husband. Now again, as yogis, remember what I said about sitting in snow. The same applies to sitting in fire. The same applies to any material condition. One is completely disassociated from the body. But this woman hadn't, and so something else happened to guide her. A Brahmin, who was a very old friend of King Puranyajan, that is who she was in the previous life, a friend of hers from that time, came to that place. Now this is again a metaphor, and began to pacify the queen with sweet words. He said, "Who are you?" And this is one of the first questions a spiritual teacher will ask. Who are you? Inquire. Who am I? Whose wife or daughter are you? Who is the man lying there? It appears you are lamenting for this dead body. Then he goes on saying, don't you recognize me? I am your eternal friend. You may remember that many times in the past you have consulted me. Who is this eternal friend, by the way? We all have one. It has been with us life after life. That in the Vedas is called Param Atma, the great soul, or the presence of God within us. So God is not just somebody out there, but is within each of us, is within every atom of the creation. So the part that is within the creation is called Brahman. Brahman is the energy of the universe. Paramatma, the great soul, Param and Atma. Atma means soul and Param means great. So the great soul, Paramatma, is present within every one of us. The soul is there, and along with the soul, the super soul, the Paramatma, whatever word you want to use, guiding us, waiting for us to turn within and say, hey, help me. What does this mean? Guide me. And I know I've been guided in that way as well. There were times where I was lost and I had no idea where to turn. And sometimes a little voice inside would say, go here, go there. And when I listened, and of course in the beginning I didn't, when I did listen, I found incredible wisdom, incredible people, incredible experiences that changed my life around. And over time, I began to learn that there was such an incredible guidance within me, that guidance was able to take me through the most difficult situations and help me. So he continues here. He says, my dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, you may remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend. Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position of enjoyment, or as the enjoyer of this material world. That's the hard condition, all of us. We've come here to enjoy this world. We want to enjoy our senses, we want to enjoy other people, we want to enjoy good foods and pleasures and fun, and that's why we're here. But all of these pleasures are temporary, and none of it will last. The pleasure we're seeking is there. It exists. But we're chasing a mirage. The real pleasure is right here. It's not outside somewhere. It's within us. And when we learn that, we understand that, then we don't need to go anywhere. Just spending time with ourselves is enough. We are enough. There is nothing else to turn to. There is nowhere else to go. So he says, my dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like a lake. Although we've been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. So we came from the spiritual, we belong to the spiritual world, and our goal is to return back to it. My dear friend, since you left me, you have become more and more materialistic, and not seeing me, you have been traveling in different forms, different bodies throughout the world. My dear friend, when you enter a body along with material desires, you become overly absorbed in sense enjoyment. Because of this, you have forgotten your spiritual life. Due to your material conceptions, you are placed in various miserable conditions. Actually, you are not the daughter of Vidarbha, that's her father, nor is this man Malaya Dhwaj, her husband. Neither is he your well-wishing husband, nor were you the actual husband of Puranyajani in his past life. You were simply captivated in this body of 9 gates. Sometimes you think yourself a man, sometimes a woman, and sometimes a transgender. This is all because of the body, which is created by Maya, the illusory energy, the illusion of this world. This illusory energy is my potency or my energy. And actually both of us, you and I, are pure spiritual beings. My dear friend, I am the super soul, the Paramatma, and you are the individual soul, Jiva. We are not different in quality, for we are both spiritual. In fact, dear friend, you are qualitatively none different from me. This is a very important piece to understand. Many people want to be one with God. And while Even Christ said it. He says, I and the Father are one. And people don't understand what that means. They think that Christ is God. They think that to become one with God is to be God. And many people say, I'm God, you're God, we're all God. But no, you're not. If you were, create a universe. Well, if you can't do a universe, just create a house, just out of nothing, out of thin air. Create a blade of grass. Create something. Show me that you're God. But you can't. You have at your core a spiritual essence that has the same quality as God, just like a drop of water has the same quality as the ocean. A drop of water from the ocean has the same taste and texture as the ocean. So in many ways, it's the same as the ocean, but it does not have the quantity of the ocean, the magnitude, the power of the ocean. In much the same way, we are none different than God, and yet we are different. Chaitanya, who was from Bengal 500 years ago, had his philosophy of achintya bhed abhed tattva, which meant that we are one with, simultaneously, one with and different from God. We are, let's do that again, simultaneously one with and different from God. So he goes on to explain here, as a person sees the reflection of his body in the mirror to be one with himself and not different, whereas others actually see two bodies. So somebody looking from the outside might say, no, there's the reflection and there's you. But when you look in the mirror, you'll say, no, this is me. So in the same condition, there appears to be a difference between God and the living entity. So there appears to be a difference, but in fact there is none. In this way, he says, both swans live together in the heart, where the one swan, so when the one swan, Jiva, the living entity, the soul, that's you and me, is willing to be instructed by the other, the Paramatma, the Super Soul, when we are willing to be guided by the higher self, by the Paramatma, then we are situated in self-realization. Because then our whole life changes. Then our whole experience changes. This is not about a belief. This is about listening to another aspect of ourself. You see, when we are listening to the mind, there are certain experiences that we have. The mind, for example, is logical. The mind can be emotional. The mind is constantly processing and evaluating things. Those are all symptoms of the mind. When we're in the mind, that's what we're experiencing. But when our mind is quiet, we can hear another voice. A voice that is very gentle, that is very kind, that is very loving. We can hear a voice that when we hear it, we feel uplifted, not drained, as we are with our mind. I sat for hours writing in connection with that voice, and hours of feeling uplifted and joyous. No sense of being drained, no sense of feeling any even physical fatigue. But that's that feeling when you're listening to that inner voice, that still, quiet, silent voice that is trying to guide you and has been trying to guide all of us. It's a whole different experience. Our world changes. We begin to change from the inside out. You see, scriptures and books can give you general knowledge, a broad spectrum of knowledge. But it's not specific. It's not customized to you. The knowledge you get from within, when you're able to hear that inner voice, is customized to you. It's specific. It's exactly what you need. Because you're unique. Because all of us are unique. And to be able to hear that guidance is directly linking up with that source or God. And then the guidance we get transforms our life massively. So he says, when a person is able to and listens to that voice and is willing to be instructed by it, such a person becomes gradually, quickly, rapidly situated in self-realization. This means he regains his original remembrance of who he is, which was lost because of material attraction. My dear King Prachinabhari, the story of Puranyajan, which I have narrated to you, is actually an instruction for self-realization. So having heard all of this, the king, due to his attachment to karmic activities, could not appreciate the deeper significance of the story. he was kind of used to worldly things. This stuff just kind of went above his head. So then the great sage Narad explained it to him in simple words. He said, look, the living entity transmigrates from one body to another. These might be one-legged bodies, two-legged bodies, three-legged bodies, four-legged, and many-legged, such as like different insects and so on, or simply legless bodies like in snakes. In all cases, he seeks to enjoy, this is known as Puranyajan, one who enjoys possessing different types of bodies in order to experience different types of enjoyment in this material world. Now you can understand this is all of us. The soul that is present in all these creatures is no different than our soul. Many people will disagree. Say, no, our soul is superior to that of the animals, and that's why we can kill them. Oh no. You see, you haven't understood scientifically what the soul is. The soul is that spark of energy that gives life to matter. Matter in itself cannot move. But only when that life force enters into the body is that body able to move. Now, whether it's moving in the form of an insect or a fish or an animal or a human, it is the same life force energy. That is called jiva, this tiny infinitesimal particle of life that is causing that body to move. And when we understand it from that perspective, we begin to understand what he's saying here, that we are all in the same situation. So, the eternal friend of the living entity is the Supreme Godhead, but because he cannot be perceived by material senses, he remains eternally unknown to the conditioned soul. So a lot of people will say that, say, where is God? Show me God. I can't see God. There has got to be no God. And yet, if you're willing to do the experiment, you can find God. There is an experiment to be done. You cannot perceive God with your senses, but any more than you can experience your mind with your eyes or your ears. You can't perceive it. Where is happiness? Happiness doesn't exist, you can say, but you can feel it, right? Love. Where is love? You can feel it. You can experience it. And therefore it exists, but you cannot see it. You cannot touch it. You can touch the person, but you cannot touch love. That love could be in that person today and be gone tomorrow, right? So the important thing to understand is that when you want to see God, God is not waiting for you to say, hey, buddy, come here, snap my fingers, now be present for me. God is not your servant. God is not waiting at your command. Rather, there are processes, and those processes are scientific. They've been tried, tested, and proven by thousands of beings over thousands of years. That's why we're reading the Bhagavatam and other texts like it, because we're trying to learn from other people how they did it. And once you learn how they did it, you can say, this is a process, this works, and I can do it too. So Narad continues his instruction. He says, the greatest enjoyment of material nature can be found in the body of a human or a demigod. So not in the animal species, but the greatest enjoyment is as a human or a demigod. Demigods are alien beings living on other planets, who have longer lives, more beautiful bodies. They're not like the green men and people that we've been shown by Hollywood, by the way. So the greatest pleasure can be found in the body which has 9 gates. What does body of 9 gates mean? 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, mouth, genitals, and rectum, along with 2 hands and 2 legs. To enjoy material nature, the human or demigod uses the queen, the material, egoic intelligence, which is contaminated by the 3 modes of nature and thus identifies with the body as I and the objects of sense enjoyment as mine. He then begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses and becomes entrapped. His friends are the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, that is eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. So these are knowledge-acquiring. That's how you gain information, through these 5 senses. And the 5 working senses, the voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. They've really broken this down to a science, right? Srila Prabhupada says, material intelligence is actually ignorance. So we are all caught up with and fascinated by material intelligence. And now we've taken that into artificial intelligence. But it is actually ignorance, he says. Nothing actually belongs to the living entity, but he becomes mad after everything, claiming, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 5, Text 8 says, Janasya moho yam aham mameti. This phrase, aham, means I am, mameti, and this is mine, mam iti. This is the illusion, meaning that this is me and this thing is mine. My husband, my wife, my children, my car, my house, mine. Me and mine. This is the crux of the illusion. And the truth is, he says, nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims that everything belongs to him. Spiritual intelligence is called buddhi yoga. Buddhi yoga. And in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text number 10, it says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayantite. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So where do you get spiritual intelligence from? It is actually given to us. It is by grace. It is wisdom that is implanted within us, downloaded into us. And then he says, when the mirror of intelligence is polished, so that is when your consciousness is cleaned, right, cleansed of all the material conditioning and brainwashing and desires and needs and fears and all of that. Then he refers to a phrase from the Chaitanya Charitamrita which says, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, which is like cleaning of a mirror. When the mirror is clean, you can really see yourself. So he says, at that time, the real activities of the living entity begin. Real intelligence is when one knows that everything belongs to God and nothing belongs to me. Narad continues, the serpent mentioned as having 5 heads is the life air circulating through the body. Pran, Apan, Udan, Vyan, and Saman. I won't go into this right now, it's too much detail. The 11th attendant, who is the commander of the others, is known as the mind. He is the leader of the senses, both in the acquisition of knowledge and in the performance of work. Just as a king is seated on a chariot, the living entity is seated in the body. The soul is seated in the body. That's the living entity. The senses are the horses that pull that chariot. So the senses are pulling us in all different directions. The sitting place is the heart, sitting place where the soul resides. The living entity sits there engaging in the struggle for existence. As time passes, year after year, these horses run without obstruction. It looks like we're chasing our dreams, our desires. We're getting what we want. Things are happening. But in fact, it says they make no progress. These are horses that are running without obstruction, but in fact, they make no progress. Being engrossed in sense enjoyment, the living entity hankers after fulfillment of his false desires and runs after sense enjoyment life after life. Srila Prabhupada writes, the living entity is influenced by a thirst for sense enjoyment. He is like a deer that goes to the desert to search out water. In a desert, an animal simply searches in vain for water. There is no water in the desert, and the animal simply sacrifices his life in an attempt to find it. Everyone is planning for future happiness, thinking that somehow or other, if he can reach a certain point, he will be happy. When I get that, when this happens, when I have $1 million, when I buy that house, whatever that is, the goal you've set for yourself, then I will be happy. He writes, in actuality, however, when he comes to that point, he sees that there is no happiness. He then plans to go further and further to another point. Time reduces the body's lifespan by the passage of days and nights, which number 360. It talks generally 360 days and nights. The daughter of time, Kala Kanya, in his old age. No one wants to accept old age, but the king of death, Yamaraj, accepts her as his sister. So he's now explaining the whole story, the whole concept. Okay, so there's a repetition happening. I hope you can bear with that. The soldiers of death are the various types of disturbances that pertain to the body and mind. The living entity lying down within the body is disturbed by many tribulations caused by nature or providence. So there are 3 kinds of disturbances that we experience. Disturbances caused by nature. It could be the weather. It could be, various circumstances that occur. Problems that are caused by other living entities. And problems that are caused by your own body and mind. Despite all this, the living entity is subjected to the necessities of the body, mind, and senses, and suffering from various types of disease is carried away by many plans due to his lust to enjoy the world. Although transcendental to this material existence, the living entity, the soul, out of ignorance, accepts all these material miseries under the pretext of false egoism, I and mine. In this way, he lives for 100 years within this body. The living entity by nature has minute independence to choose his own good and bad fortune. But when he forgets his supreme master, the supreme Godhead, he becomes influenced by the modes of material nature, identifies with the body for the interest of the body, and becomes attached to various activities. And he tries to counteract these different miserable conditions of the world, but besides his best attempts, he remains conditioned and controlled by the laws of nature. So I think we'll read a little more. The real interest of the living entity is to get out of this darkness, to get out of this conditioned life, this nescience that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. And the only remedy is to surrender unto the supreme Godhead. And for then, one will become completely detached from the material world and manifest real knowledge. Now, you see, you may say, why should I come to God? And really, we're not interested in which form of God you go to. If you think Christ is your way, go that way. If you think that you want to go and become one with the light, go do that, right? If you think that someone else is your God, go do that. But there are certain symptoms that are being talked about if you are truly on the path. You must know what are the symptoms. Otherwise, what happens is you're just believing something, you're just following something. And whatever, if that makes you feel good, great. But the Vedas turn it into a science and say, look, here are the symptoms of what you will experience. And he says he will become completely detached from this world. That means you have gained something so much better that you will give up something that is inferior. And you will have real knowledge, not just the knowledge of the world, but true knowledge of the self and of God. Not based on books, but based on realization, based on experience. One who is always eager, hearing and chanting the nectarian glories of the Supreme Godhead, very soon receives his causeless mercy and becomes eligible to see him face to face. Sri Hari, the Supreme Being, is the Paramatma, the Supersoul, guiding all living entities. He's the supreme controller of material nature and also our best friend, and everyone should take shelter of him. In doing so, one's life will be auspicious and one will become fearless. So this is another very important characteristic. One becomes fearless. Such a person is no different than God. One who knows this secret is actually educated and can be the spiritual master of the world. So with that, I'll bring it to a close. And I'd like to see your questions and see what you've been thinking about as I've been discussing and reading these texts. Let's see what you've got. So those of you that haven't written and still have some questions in mind, please feel free to bring your questions onto the chat, whether you're in Zoom or whether you're on YouTube. I've got all of that showing up over here and I'll be able to address your questions. Our first question is from Priestess Sarafina. She writes, if you do believe in Vedic astrology and energy chakras, you feel negative energy all around you and is slowing you down in all you do. If you can inbox me with your rating. Okay. All right. The rest is more personal. And yes, I do. And I want you to know, Sarafina, that these energies do exist. Just as much as there are light energies, there are dark energies too. But what is important for us is that we develop a connection with the Absolute. And when we connect with that absolute truth, the greatest power of all, then neither the darkness nor the light matter. We don't need to be good or bad. We don't need to be right or wrong. The platform of true divinity, true spirituality, is beyond duality, beyond right and wrong, beyond the place of darkness and light. So, yes, for most of us, yes, it's very, very important to be aware of these energies. I'm not discrediting what you're saying. I fully agree. We need to be able to know how to deal with them because they do tend to affect and attack our mind. And we need to know how to address those issues. So it's a deeper topic. I've done some videos on my YouTube channel. You can look up a video that I did there called the Mind Virus, the Demon Bully Within Our Mind. It's on my YouTube channel. It's in the Mind on a Leash playlist. Celie asks, 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. After surgery and months of chemotherapy, I felt oddly detached to my body, as if only a witness, as it went through many changes afterwards. My view of life changed going through this journey. After this suffering, I realized spiritual intelligence is a priority because we are here briefly. Life is much more than physical existence. Bravo, Celie. So important what you've said. And sometimes it takes that difficult moment. It takes that painful situation, that life-altering moment. It could be a death. It could be an accident. It could be anything like that. For me, it was a near-death situation. Not that I went out of my body, but almost had an accident. Really bad one. Almost. And was saved at the last moment. It takes some kind of life-altering event for a lot of us to really start taking our spirituality seriously. For many people, it's just something casual. Oh yeah, I'm a spiritual person. What is spirituality to you? Oh, I just do some crystals and some astrology. Okay, it's a good starting place, but there's a whole lot more to it. There's a whole lot more to it. And that's why I put out these talks, so that people understand the depth of spiritual wisdom that is available to us, that no one's been telling us about. So I really hope that you'll take advantage of that. But thank you, Celie, for that. Yes, I understand what you're trying to say, and how that stage 3 cancer changed your life and your whole outlook, and you began to realize, and just because you had that experience of being a witness to your body, you began to realize that I have a body. I'm not my body, but I have a body. This is one of the biggest insights, and it's the most important one to remember. So as long as we remember that, we'll know that if this body is not me, then who is me? Who am I? And as we dive deeper into that understanding, we begin to find ourselves. And that's the greatest blessing of life. That spiritual intelligence, when you get to that point, is something that will become your eternal asset. That will go with you life after life. Even Narad points this out. He says that people come into their future lives remembering things. They don't know what they're remembering. They don't know why they're remembering. But they are remembering certain things. Like I kept asking, what is this life? Why are we here? What does it all mean? People thought I was stupid. People thought I was wasting my time reading all those books, trying to understand these things, having all those discussions with people. But for some reason, I must have done this work in an earlier lifetime. And that's why I was looking for it. But Bhagavad Gita says that when a yogi performs, or any spiritual person, makes progress on their spiritual life, but does not complete that journey, and it cannot be done in just one lifetime because there's so much to it. Because we have to transform everything inside out. We have to transform those material desires that plague us. We have to come to that place where we desire nothing except God. And for that to happen is not easy, right? Because we came here to this world to enjoy. We came here to this world to experience. And by all means, have your experience, have your enjoyment. And when you've understood that none of it can fulfill you, then look for something higher, because the higher thing exists. Don't give up. Don't go out and think it's hopeless and get depressed and commit suicide. No. That bottom that you've reached is the beginning of something great. That's the time to turn to spirituality. When you recognize that you are worthless, when you recognize that you're not good enough, that is the time for prayer. That is the time for humility. That is the time for surrender. And in that condition, you will find God. You will find the truth. Jessica asks, so animal/pet soul and human souls are one and the same. I read recently that animals are all part of a group soul dynamic. There's a lot of theories, Jessica, out there. I'm just going by what's in the Vedas. The Vedas don't talk about soul groups. I know that's a common philosophy amongst the spiritual-minded people, and maybe it's been propagated by certain psychics. But the Vedas were written by highly evolved, enlightened beings. And their version is, well, they don't talk about soul groups, but they do talk about how the soul goes through all 8,400,000 different species before it comes to the human form of life. Well, actually, one should say 400,000 different types of human on this planet and others. So 8 million species is what it goes through before it comes to the human. And so the human form of life is a great blessing. It's a great gift. And in that human form of life, we get to inquire about who we are. Now, if your idea of a great gift is that someone's taking care of you and you've got food to eat and a place to stay, well, then a dog's life might be better than your life. And that's perfectly fine, right? But then our soul will be carried to that kind of life. But if we wish to inquire about spirituality, athato brahma jigyasa, if we have jigyasa, if we have curiosity, if we have a desire about the divine, about God, that's what human life is for. That's what this advanced intellect is for. This is where spiritual intelligence comes in. This is something that no artificial intelligence can do, and not even our human intelligence goes there. Our human intelligence only works in the realm of this world, in the realm of how to get what we want and meet our desires. That's what it's meant for. But how to go beyond this world, we have to awaken a deeper intelligence. And that intelligence is the intelligence of our spirit, of our soul, and of God, who is present within all of us. So our animals and our pets are as precious as any human being. And they are in those incredible bodies to teach us the ways of love, to teach us the ways of patience, to teach us so many things, right? Sometimes they're there to serve us and help us understand. Because as humans, we've gone so far off from who we can be. We've lost our way. We've messed up the planet. We're messing up our bodies. And we've messed up our intelligence as well. So now the computers are overtaking us. And we're finding ourselves scared. But it's time that we reclaim our true power as spiritual beings and our spiritual intelligence and deep wisdom that lies within all of us. All right, let's see if there's anything else. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your presence. Please be here every week. Just a little bit of information. I'm going to be traveling next week. I will record this session and it will be put up on YouTube and it will play out on Tuesday at the same time, at just a little after 7 Pacific time. And so please be there for that. But I won't be there to answer any questions because I'm traveling. But I would love for you to write your questions in the comments next week. You can do it anytime you like, but particularly next week. Write them in the comments so that I can answer them later on. Thank you so much for being here. Hare Krishna. Good night, everyone.